Howdy.
Hi.
Yes, it is.
That's right.
A little tiny bit.
It's the phone.
Gosh. So it test. John, is this okay?
Just as part of comments and not any questions or presentations. Part of my
Okay.
talk.
Kimberly, whenever you're ready. Good evening. A special city council meeting for September 14th will come to order. Please, Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll, being as that we are missing one?
Councilmember Bertone,
Here.
Councilmember Ebner,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Weber,
Here.
Councilmember Vienna,
Present.
Mayor Bedar.
Here.
The record will reflect all council members are present.
Councilmember Vienna will be remotely calling in. Thank you very much. Okay. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oral communications. Members of the audience are invited to address the City Council on any item on this agenda or not on this agenda. Public comments will not be taken during each individual agenda item except for public hearings. Comments on public hearing items will be heard when the item is scheduled for discussion. Under the provisions of the Brown Act, the legislative body is prohibited from engaging in discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. However, your concerns will be referred to a staff or set for discussion at a later date. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. temporary accommodation due to COVID. As a standing accommodation to ensure participation of those with sensitive or other risk conditions, the city will offer a nearby alternate location where the individual who desires to participate at the council meetings and would desire to wear a mask, maintain 6 feet in social distancing, and ensure for that those around them are of also similar protected regardless of the vaccination status may watch the meeting. Such individuals will be allowed to remain in the area only if they comply with these requirements. To participate in oral communications, such individuals will be called, can proceed to the public speaking podium to address the city council, and will be able to return to the fully masked and socially distanced location with minimal exposure to the unmasked individuals. Deborah, do we have any cards?
Mayor, all the cards that have been submitted are for the item that's on agenda. We have nothing off agenda.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this is the time for the public to speak for the item that's on the agenda. So
Okay.
if that's the way that you'd like to handle it, like we've been handling all of our council meetings where the public comment is at the beginning, then we can handle it that way. So any member of the public wishing to speak on the study session tonight should speak during this period right now.
All right.
And the first speaker will be William Tweed from General Pump.
Honorable Council, I believe you have in front of you a letter from General Pump Company, Mike Bodart, President and CEO of the company, that we had presented to you earlier. And I just got in last night, so I'm presenting mine later. There are copies of mine also, but I'd like to read it. As owner of 159 North Acacia Street property with tenant General Pump Company for 36 years, also chairman of the General Pump Board of Directors, I'd like to make the following comments. I understand and respect the position San Dimas Council is in caused by state mandates. I do not think the property that General Pump sits on is appropriate for SB 23 or any part of the housing plan, and particularly being part of the downtown plan and its restrictions. The restrictions on our property because of the changes in city plan not only puts General Pump and many community water systems, including San Dimas' Golden State Water, who has relied on General Pump continuously for over 70 years, at risk, as stated in the General Pump letter. The development and use restrictions and non-compliance status are a threat to General Pump, whose processes, equipment, repair, and manufacturing, storage are dictated by the EPA, AWWA, and NSF, along with the customer's needs, and within reason should not be hindered by city restrictions. If GPC is required to make changes to facilities and equipment or processes, the city permit process and restrictions could be a major risk for the many water agencies that rely on their service and 24-hour response. I shudder at what would happen if an earthquake damage, fire damage, or anything requires rebuilding requirements that could devastate public safety. GPC is an important, relied upon partner with nearly 100 water agencies, with many contacts outgoing for renewable 5-year terms throughout Southern California. There's also the additional issue of right-of-way and easement, and I will skip reading that part. The last thing that applies to 4 properties that should be considered by the council is first, the zoning of these properties was put in place in the late 60s by City of San Dimas as a safety barrier for residents and their families from the rail lines and its effects. The gold line of commercial line, the commercial rail line is being moved 20 feet north. putting the center line of the train 10 feet away from one of the high-density housing properties you are proposing. That puts the edge of the train 6 feet from children and families.
Sir, your 3 minutes has ended. Thank you so much for your public comments.
Can I ask for more time?
Yes, you may have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The Euclid Avenue crossing gate could end up 10 feet from high-density housing, and both sides of it bouncing echoes, ringing bells 7 to 10 minutes during rush hour, with speeds up to 55 miles per hour. Along 3 of the properties, the GO line will average a distance of 26 to 46 feet from high-density 3-story houses, with max height of 40 feet, and be ascending to a height of 20 feet for the rail and 33 feet for the top of the cars. At speeds up to 55 miles per hour, creating wind turbulence and dust. This will be level with some of the 2nd and 3rd-story windows of the high-density housing units. Not to mention the echo from the low-frequency sound multiplication. The 750-volt DC power lines above the GO line trains will create cell phone diminishing influences up to 600 feet. These are just some of my thoughts. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next.
Next speaker will be Marcella Saul.
Good afternoon, Mayor Badar and council members. I live on the property near that you're talking about, putting housing and all that. It's 305 South Acacia Street. I live on Calore Street. That place had been closed down before, kind of abandoned. And the neighbors are kind of tired of it. I know I am. Trucks going up and down Acacia. It's such a small street. There needs to be something done about that building. I know there's jobs going on in there right now, and one of the Olin Mills or one of them moved out, and it's one left. But if you're considering any kind of property in San Dimas to remove, I used to be a preschool teacher, and the trucks going up and down Acacia are kind of dangerous for the kids that live in the villa apartments and near the park. So that's something you should consider in the future by changing that area and putting more housing there. You know, if you need housing according to the government or the county or whatever, I just direct you guys to look at that property and reassess it, because it's been there, I'm quite sure, for about close to 60 years, you know. So if you're considering housing, please do so and look at that property and reevaluate it and everything. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next speaker is Ian Stewart.
Good evening, council and staff. Thank you for your time tonight. I have been working, I'm the managing partner of the LLC that owns the property that LA Signal operates out of at 155 North Eucla. And I have been working directly with Chris, the city manager, and Henry and Marco and other staff members to work out and see how we can work together and help you and you help us through this difficult issue. And I want to make it very clear that I'm in support of finding a solution, as I said in the last meeting. And if I've been told by the planning department that an overlay zone, which would allow both the current use and an alternate use, is possible. And if that's the case, I'm in strong support of it. And I want to continue to work with Chris and the planning department to find a workable solution for our properties, as long as they don't, our current uses, permitted by right uses, aren't impacted. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mayor, those are all the speaker cards that have been turned in, unless there are members of the audience who would like to come up.
And, yes, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and the board. Thank you for having me. I'm, as a resident of 301 North Eucla, just wanted to express about with the Gold Line construction and with the housing that could be possibly implemented there. The concern that I have as a homeowner is the traffic that connects from Bonita Avenue up into Gladstone, and that really being the only outlet that would connect Bonita from the north side of San Dimas. With the increased housing, if that is to be chosen as an additional location, we would expect traffic, especially with the Gold Line running every 10 to 15 minutes, to possibly double or even triple. So I'd like to suggest a consideration for perhaps an additional outlet of some sort or a street, maybe perhaps from Lowe's that could connect from Acacia to allow for additional traffic. But right now, as it stands, if additional housing is brought on Eucla along with the Gold Line, then we can expect to see just the nonstop traffic with all of the trains. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Okay, we're going to review and discuss the sixth cycle housing elements and site recommendations. Henry, no. Henry, are you introducing Jeff Malloway?
I'll introduce the project, Honorable Mayor, and then Jeff as well.
All right, Henry.
Good evening. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. The item before the City Council tonight is the draft housing element and site selection for the sixth cycle housing element. As the City Council is aware, currently the city is facing various housing and RHNA-related challenges from the state, such as our RHNA obligation being approximately 3 times higher than previous cycles at 1,248 dwelling units versus the 463 dwelling units in the current fifth cycle. Additionally, the past few years, the state has been passing a number of housing-related bills that aims to take away local control and puts pressure on cities to allow for housing-related developments. The city is tasked with trying to identify suitable sites to accommodate these potential residential units. This current cycle is more difficult than previous cycles because the state has funded a task force specifically at analyzing the sites and programs that jurisdictions are selecting and making sure that they're viable. With this background, the city began the housing element update journey approximately 1 year ago. And through multiple community surveys, stakeholder meetings with the housing element update subcommittee, and City Council and Planning Commission study sessions, we're before the City Council with 15 potential sites that have been recommended by the City Council and the Housing Subcommittee for the City Council to consider. The housing element is currently in draft form and may include some grammatical and consistency errors. These errors do not materially change the information within the document, nor will it affect HCD's review of our draft housing element. Staff and the consultant will correct these items prior to scheduling the future Planning Commission and City Council hearings to adopt the final housing element and submitting the adopted housing element to HCD. With that, I'd like to first call up City Attorney Jeff Malawi to walk through the discussion process, and then afterwards, Associate Planner Ken Fichtelman will provide the staff report presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, the council is considering at least the 15 sites that are listed in the staff report to consider and discuss whether to include those in the city's housing element RHNA site inventory. And so this brings up a bit of a complex conflict of interest issue because we have a couple council members that own property within 500 feet of some of these sites, 4 of these sites to be exact. So we have Councilmember Ebner, who owns property within 500 feet of sites number 3 and number 6 on our list in the staff report. And we have Councilmember Vienna, who owns property within 500 feet of sites number 4 and number 5 in our staff report. So the way that we can structure this discussion so that those council members don't participate in any of the discussion about the sites where they have a conflict, but they can participate in the discussion about all the rest of the sites, is we have to segment the discussion. So essentially that means we'll talk about, when we talk about the sites where they have a conflict, that council member will need to leave the room. Then they'll come back, and then we'll talk about 2 more sites, and the other council member will have to leave the room. And they'll come back, and then the whole council together will discuss and vote on the remaining 11 sites, or potentially more sites if council wants to bring up more sites. It's important to note 2 things in this process, and that is we have to discuss the sites where council members have a conflict first. So we will do that. We'll do those 4 first. And then also, once we've made a decision on sites 3, 4, 5, and 6, and the council members that have conflicts come back into the room to discuss the remaining 11 sites, the council cannot change its mind later on in the night on 3, 4, 5, and 6. So once you've made your decision on 3, 4, 5, and 6, that's the final decision, and it can't be changed later in the night, because theoretically, the council member that has the conflict coming back into the room might influence your decision to change your mind on those 4 sites. So I'd ask you to bear with me when I'm walking the council through this structure of segmenting this discussion. The first thing that we have to do is decide whether the council is going to consider sites 3 and 6 first, where Councilmember Ebner has a conflict, or sites 4 and 5 first, where Councilmember Vienna has a conflict. And the way that we have to do that is by a random selection method. And what I've done is I've taken 2 business cards, and on one of them I wrote 3 and 6, and on another one I wrote 4 and 5. And I'm just going to randomly select one of those cards, and this is officially the way that you do these things.
Where's the music?
And I'll pick this one. So this says 4 and 5, so that means we will discuss sites 4 and 5 first. And those are the sites that Councilmember Vienna has a conflict. So that's the western portion of the Albertson Shopping Center. And the property is located north of Arrow between San Dimas Avenue and Walnut. So for that discussion, Councilmember Vienna is going to need to leave the room, which I guess means sign off of his Zoom. And we'll talk about sites 4 and 5 first, and the council will vote on those, discuss those, and vote on those, whether to include them in the list. We'll bring Councilmember Vienna back in, and Councilmember Ebner will leave. And then we'll do sites 3 and 6. And then Ebner will come back in, and you'll discuss the rest of the sites.
Okay, I just have a question.
Yes.
I know that John has prepared a PowerPoint on some comments and thoughts. When do we hear that portion of what he wants to do?
And Jeff, before you answer that question, so typically we have a staff report that's about everything. Council is not making comments. Then council members ask questions.
Right.
And in my case, I have a number of general questions. They're not about specific pieces of property. So what is the sequence? And and my comments in the PowerPoint are general in nature as well, although there are some maps that show specific things, and obviously 3, 6, 5, and 4 are all included, in numbers and on the map and all that kind of stuff. But they're more of a big picture comments.
Okay, thank you for that information. So to address the question about the staff report, so it sounds like there's more staff report after I finish speaking. So we'll complete that staff report. All the council members will be here for that. And then all the council members can ask questions on the staff report. I would just ask that you don't ask questions about specific sites that you have a conflict on. Okay? And then similarly, when you present your PowerPoint presentation, I don't know when you were planning to do it, but I would hope that would be once we're done with 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then all the council is together again, and then you start discussing the rest of the remaining 11 sites, or maybe more sites, because otherwise your comments would be potentially influencing the discussions on sites 3 and 6. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
I wonder if I could ask a question. If you include a piece of property, what is it zoned?
That's going to be a question for the planning department. So
They will discuss the mechanics of this?
Yes, so that may be part of their staff report, but if it's not, you can ask that as a question
Okay.
after the staff report.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of Jeff? Okay. Ken?
Hi, Mr. Mayor, Councilman. So we're here tonight presenting the 6th cycle housing element update, the site selection in particular. We do have a little bit of background just to run through kind of, you should have heard most of this already, a little bit of it's been updated. But this is the 6th cycle of the housing element process. This one will run from this year, 2021, through 2029. The housing element currently is updated every 8 years, and it's one of the 7 required elements of the San Dimas General Plan. It's a policy document, so it provides broad goals, policy programs, and objectives related to housing in San Dimas, and it provides the framework for future development. The specifics of that development will be part of the zoning code. So for this cycle, the city of San Dimas has been allocated 1,248 housing units through the RENA allocation process. The units are assigned by income level, as you can see on the screen. This process is not optional. The city of San Dimas must plan for the allocated units. There are substantial penalties that can occur if the housing element is not certified by HCD, including loss of local land control, vulnerability to lawsuits where the city would be responsible for paying both sides of the lawsuit in a loss, and loss of state grant funding. For the site selection process itself, staff first performed a citywide inventory of possible housing element sites. We then met with the city's consultant, Placeworks, and performed an in-depth analysis of sites, narrowing the list down to 16, sorry. We were guided in the site selection process by first an HCD technical memorandum, which gives us what sort of site should be selected and the criteria that HCD will be using when analyzing any sites that are presented to them. There were a few direct conversations with HCD when they cleared up questions that we had in particular about sites and the process. And we were guided by the city's housing element consultant, who, because of his knowledge of HCD workings, was able to further let us know what kind of sites would be viable for this update. Vacant sites were prioritized, and additional sites were considered and prioritized due to proximity to mass transit, ability to revitalize the downtown area, underutilized or aging structures. HCD places a priority on what's called land value ratio, where they look for the value of improvements on land to be lower than the actual land, and having appropriate infrastructure to handle any growth. Staff presented the sites to the Housing Element Subcommittee. The subcommittee added the Villa Verde site to the list of 15, making it 16 sites. Those 16 sites were presented to the Planning Commission during a study session. By unanimous vote, the Planning Commission voted to remove the Villa Verde site from the 16 sites proposed in the draft housing element, and also by unanimous vote, they voted to recommend the remaining 15 sites to the City Council to be included in the draft housing elements. Accessory dwelling units are expected to supply a good number of the units in San Dimas. SCAG has assumptions on exactly what percentage can be considered very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. We did attempt to see if we could get better ratios for low and very low by asking potential, or anybody who was coming in with an ADU permit, who they were looking to rent to. We ultimately found that the SCAG assumptions worked better for San Dimas. So we are expected to use ADUs to supply 350 units over the housing element cycle. 84 of those will be very low, 158 will be low, 7 moderate, and 102 above moderate units. Individual vacant single-family residential lots will provide for an additional 167 units. Because these are single-family residential, all of those are considered above moderate income units, and 96 units are from projects which are under development or have been proposed, such as Brasada. The number of units which remained after the ADUs and single-family residences were counted was 731 units to comply with our RENA allocation. With that, that is all staff has before talking about the individual sites.
Ken, I had a couple questions just about the numbers and everything. There's a chart in the draft housing element, and it's on page of the draft housing element. It's 4-11 for anybody following along. In the agenda packet, it's page 105. And let me get to that myself. And it has in the very far right, there's 2 columns that I'm interested in, the realistic density and the number of units. So the first one is realistic density. And I see a number of properties are over 35 units per acre. And the reason that 30 units per acre is a significant number is because, as my understanding is, the state assumes or acknowledges or lets you use that density to be kind of automatically affordable if you build 30 units per acre. Is that a good assumption to begin with?
A percentage of the units can be considered very low or low income automatically, yes.
Okay, so what percentage is that then?
It would depend. That's one of the reasons why in the programs we are recommending the city council study, what's the term? Inclusionary housing. Sorry, I blanked there for a minute. But normally the number is between 10 and 15% is what HCD feels safe giving to a city without an inclusionary ordinance.
That has 30 units per acre?
Yes.
So another site that has 15 units per acre, let's say, you don't automatically, HCD doesn't assume you get any affordable units out of that, unless there's some other thing like the inclusionary zoning or something else.
We'd have to have a program in place to count anything at that low of a density as low or very low income.
Okay, thanks, because I didn't realize that there was just that percentage. That makes a lot of sense. The second question is about the number of units, and the chart has Villa Verde in there, so we don't want to count that because, or I'm not going to count that because that's not in the recommendation, nor would I recommend it the way it was presented anyway. And if you total up the number of units, so I did this, I totaled up the number of units, and not counting what I'm going to call the backup property, which is a USDA, which I know is being recommended, but not counting that one, there are 1,632 units in that, what I'm going to call, I think you're kind of expecting to get that many units in that column. First of all, is my understanding of that column correct?
Roughly. That is, if a developer comes in and builds it what the realistic density is, that's the number of units we would get.
Okay. Okay. And so now so we have all these sites, and that number is 1,632. It's quite a bit more than the 1,248 that were required to produce or allowed to be produced or make it possible under the RENA numbers. So why is that number so high?
There's 2 reasons. We do know the number's high, but if I can get you to turn the page to 4-12 and look at table HE 4.5.
Yes.
I was just looking at this. If you look at the housing sites and the ADUs, I mean, this gives you the number of units we're expecting in each income level. If you look at the remainder for very low and low, we are only 121 over, and if you take out the Villa Verde site, subtract 35 from that, we're only 85 over. So while it seems like we do have a surplus of units, we're not that far over on the units that matter most to HCD, which is the low and very low income units. The second part of that answer is that HCD has what's called a no net loss. So if we have a property that we're saying develops at, we're looking to get 30 units an acre out of it for, I'm making up these numbers so it's not any property in particular, but we're looking to get 120 units out of it. If a developer comes in and says, well, I'm going to do high income or high level condos and I'm only going to build 50, they might be allowed to do that, but we would lose that 70 units. The state has said we have to be able to make up that 70. So if we only tried to get this number to total the 1248 that we're allocated, anytime a developer came in under our projections, we would be reopening the housing element and doing this process again. So we are trying to get a buffer behind us because we fully expect that there will be projects that come in under our expected number of units. And there may be projects that come in that have absolutely no very low or low income level units included. We don't want to have to be going through this process every 2 or 3 years every time we have a property developed. So that's the reason for the surplus.
And that makes sense. So the idea there then is that you need more total units so that you can reach those affordable unit numbers. That seems to be what you're saying.
Correct, and just so we have that buffer so that
you have a buffer.
Yeah, so if we do lose a property, we're not doing this again and having to go through HCD again.
Right, got it. So then the pieces of property that are listed, we were thinking we were aiming for 1248 total, of which 600 and something is low and very low. But actually, the housing element proposes that on the 15 sites you're talking about, 14, not counting the backstop, so I won't count that one right now. But for those ones, you're actually not looking for the 1248 plus the 600, which includes 600. You're looking for 1632 so that you're insured to get that 600 whatever low, very low, plus a buffer in the low, very low. Am I saying that kind of right?
For the most part, we weren't looking at a total number of units. We weren't saying we have to hit this number to be able to get the low, very low. But this was the number that we got to with the densities we were looking at to ensure we got that low, very low. If council did entertain the idea of an inclusionary ordinance at some point, we might be able to back off a little because we would know we were getting those very low and low income units. But because we don't have anything at this point, we used the sites that we thought met our RENA obligation and met the income levels in the best possible way.
Right. Yep. I've been talking about that inclusionary zoning for about 2 or 3 years now, so it'll be good to gain some traction because we're forced to do it. Okay. The other question then was about having to revisit the housing element. And it sounds like what you're saying is that, say we've got this 1632, we've got 100 or 200 extra affordable units on the plan, and a developer or we decide, oh, well, that property, maybe we want to zone it less, or at some point we just want to maybe not take it out, but just say, we're just not going to worry about that one as much. But whatever reason, units are not produced at the level that is listed in this chart. They're produced at a lesser level for both the total number and the very low and low. Are we safe and avoiding having to go and find other properties or resubmit the housing or revisit the housing element as long as we don't go below those minimum numbers, what is it, 620, 604, is that what it is for the low and very low, but whatever that number is?
Yes, that's why we have the buffer built in, so that if some sites do come in below expectation, that the no net loss policy, we have other sites that can handle the density. So as long as we can get there with we're at 1,600, let's say, and one site comes in 100 under, so we're at 1,500, we'd still be fine because we have other sites that can handle the density. It would be if multiple sites came in under the density we are are thinking we can get, that it would become an issue.
Great, that's one of my main questions, so that's good. I don't know if I've got it. If anybody else has another question while I'm looking through my notes here, that's fine.
Does anybody else have a question?
I just, if I could ask one quick point of clarification from you. For some background, I've talked quite extensively with a few people in the community that are extremely concerned about the RENA process. And I still think that there's a lot of confusion surrounding the process and what it really just in layman's terms means to, somebody when their favorite shopping center or their grocery store ends up on this list. I think to many in the community, it still, to them, seems like if it's on the list, it's going to get developed. And I've been trying to reinforce that that's not necessarily the case, but I think in many of these state mandates that are just have way too many moving pieces, it's very difficult to conceptualize what that really means to the resident in the community. Is there any way that you could break it down just real quick, from the perspective of somebody in the community whose favorite shopping center or favorite store ends up on this list? What does that really mean to them?
If I can use an analogy that may make it real easy for the layman. Let's say you have 100 egg cartons in your house, they're all empty. You have space for 1,200 eggs. We're not going to say you have to fill all those eggs. I mean, if at some point only half of the crates are full, well, you've planned for all the eggs you have to have. You only have half, that's fine, you planned for it. You're okay. So that's what this whole RENA process is as well. We have to plan for the number of units. We don't have to ensure they're built. The city is not a developer. We don't do any of the building. That's purely between property owners and developers. So once we've planned for those units, if only half of them get built, that's fine. We've done our part. So we're not in the business of making sure the units are built. This is not saying just because something is on the list that it will become a certain thing. We still have to put the mechanisms in place to even see how the change would occur. So there'll be input. There will be chances for community input on that in the future. All we're doing now is a planning phase. We have to put the egg cartons out. We don't have to make sure they're full.
So in that instance, let's just say, again, if you wanted to use your same analogy or whatever, a property owner in that shopping center that I love to go to every day or what have you, property owner doesn't want to sell to any developer. They end up on the list. They don't want to sell. They want to continue doing business as they see fit.
And that's fine. We're not forcing anybody to sell. We're not eminent domain. I've had a few calls about people wondering about eminent domain. That is not part of this process. So it is, all the city has to do is make sure we've got land zoned at the proper density. It has to have a chance of development, but we do not have to ensure that it is actually developed, and we will not be forcing any property owners to sell, or we won't even be pressuring property owners to sell. That is between them and the developers.
Thanks.
So are we saying just in perfect English, that we're going to submit 15 or 16 or whatever that number might be, and we're going to say, these are what we believe can be built. And at some point, none of these places may be built. So at the end of the day, none of them possibly. We've had this gone through several, iterations of past RENA, obligations, and to my knowledge, we really haven't built one, haven't obligated anybody to have to build one. So this process is just one of those things. But my question is, in the beginning when we talked about the penalties and the potential penalties and everything, what if we, the city council, said, you know what, we're not interested in this RENA thing. What is our actual penalty at the end of the day if we don't submit to the RENA process? Is there a housing amount of money, a specific amount of money that we may or may lose? And I think you may not be the person to answer that, but Ann Garcia may be able to answer that.
Well, I can actually answer that, Mayor. Because there isn't just one penalty, there's multiple. And they could run into, large values in a hurry. The most important one is the city can be sued directly by developers, by anybody basically who has an interest. And if we lose those lawsuits, we are on the hook for both ends. We would have to pay the plaintiffs and the defendants' fees, plus any penalties that the court decides on. In addition, we could lose local land control. The state could come in and simply say, you know, you're not living up to the obligations that the state has mandated. We are negating your zoning code. They would be able to actually let people do what they want if they wanted to. San Diego was actually threatened with this for their housing element this year because they were late in supplying some of the certification documents that were needed. And the last is we could lose state funding, which would be transportation grants, parks grants. I mean, we would possibly lose all funding from the state for major projects like that.
Okay, so in short, by us going through this process and we certifying whatever number of properties we have, we've complied and we've taken ourselves out of all of those potential problems.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions. So what will it be zoned to if we include them?
We do not know yet. The housing element part isn't done for a few years. We have to have it submitted to HCD and they will certify it, but we have up to 3 years to decide on the mechanisms that will rezone or put overlays on the properties. So we do have what we suggest the density to be, how we get there, whether it be a rezoning to different levels of multifamily residential, whether it be an overlay. We have 3 years to make that happen. So I can't give you a specific answer yet because we will figure that out after this is certified by HCD.
Okay, but they would all be eligible to be zoned for single-family or multi-family residential?
Well, we would be proposing that it be multifamily or mixed use.
Okay.
We're not proposing any single-family zoning as part of this. San Dimas already has enough single-family zoning to meet any RENA obligations we have at that level.
Thank you.
Chris?
Mr. Mayor, if I just may pose a question, because I think some of the council members are pointing to this. While we don't know what the ultimate mechanism that we will use, whether it's a rezone, an overlay, or an inclusionary zoning, can I ask staff to respond to kind of the gamut that if we do, what's the most restrictive change we could make and what are the implications versus something else? Like a rezone to an affordable housing, a property that's currently zoned, let's say industrial, has an implication on the property. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, if we do a rezoning, the property, any businesses on the property could become, they could become non-conforming, which could mean that over a period of years they would have to cease their use. It's not immediate. It takes some time before that cessation of activity comes into play. If we do use an overlay, that would simply be placed over the existing zone, so there would be no change to the underlying zone. They would just be given an added use that would be multifamily or mixed use that they could also put on those properties. So the most restrictive would be using multifamily residential zoning, but that is also, in some instances, the best way to ensure that properties are developed, and HCD will be looking for some strictly multifamily residential zoning.
Let me ask you another question. You said that we're not going to force the people to sell. What happens if they want to sell to someone, but the person that's buying it wants to keep the same zoning and it isn't residential? Can they do that?
Well, if part of this process, any of these properties will have either an overlay or a rezone placed on them. So they could sell to somebody else, but they would still have the same zoning that we are looking at doing as part of these projects. You can't opt a property out of the zoning.
Okay.
If I can add something as well, to the overlay zone, the current overlay zone that we have is the affordable housing overlay zone, which is 30 dwelling units per acre. Additionally, as part of the housing element, one of the programs is to relook at the affordable housing overlay zone and to provide incentives if we were to utilize that overlay zone. So HCD is going to be looking at that overlay zone to make sure that if it's utilized, that it's something that will incentivize affordable housing. So the one that we have right now is 30 dwellings per acre. So for instance, the SP23, if we utilize the overlay zone, then the density goes from 12 to 16 at market rate, which we're proposing, to 30 dwelling units per acre, and that would be potentially affordable and could increase densities, decrease setbacks, parking, et cetera, with the affordable housing overlay zone.
I did have another question that I remembered. So say we're going to adopt a certain number of sites and certain specific sites, and say there's somebody else that's not on the list comes to us and says, well, that sounds like a good idea to me. You know, I've got a property that's not zoned for multifamily right now, but I'm willing to put in, you know, whatever number of units, 20 units per acre. I'll do 15 or 20% affordable, like the inclusionary zone is going to do, or whatever that percentage is. Will those units that are produced, both the affordable and the total, work toward our RENA numbers, even if they're not part of the housing element sites?
Yes, they would. Any units built in San Dimas will count towards our numbers. We just have to designate properties so we can show that we are making an active effort to make sure that many units could be built. If other properties come forward, wanted to be rezoned, we would go through the same process we do now. We would take those to Planning Commission and Council, and you would be able to vote on those, but any units would count towards our numbers.
Okay, one last question. I know a gentleman asked, and who lives on Euclid, but let's take any street that might be affected that's got houses on it. You got families, got people have been living there for a while. It's a single-family neighborhood. Happens to be near some of these these newly zoned or specified properties. As Henry pointed out, and he used the good word, and it's someplace in here, but incentivize or make attractive the production of housing is what the whole goal is. And throughout the housing element, it talks about whether it's the gold line or people wanting to move to apartments or whatever the reason is, it's saying that this kind of housing is attractive. Developers are going to want to build it. And the purpose, the goal of us is not to like play a shell game or try to wink and nod our way through it. It's got to actually say these number of units are really going to be built in the next 8 years, most likely. They don't have to be built. But our idea on the zoning and everything else is to not be clever about it and try to discourage it. We actually have to encourage the developing. So what do we say, this is the question, to a homeowner who is on a street, and as Henry just said, there's a piece of property that if they use certain, decide to do certain kind of housing and all the affordable and everything, there could be a lot of houses on that piece of property. And there's, and it's right near a single family. And other ones that may not be right next to the neighborhood, traffic may go through that neighborhood to get to one place or another. What do you say to a person who's living on a street that is like that?
Well, this is only the planning for the units. Any development concerns we could deal with at the time of the development, they still would have to go through the process, submit plans. We would have a chance at that point to try to mediate any concerns. But that would be something we could do on a development by development basis when those come time to talk about. This is, it's almost premature at this point to talk about that because that isn't the purpose of the housing element. The housing element's the framework. The mechanisms we use, we decide over the next 3 years, and the exactions we want from developers come at the time of the developments.
All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, Ken.
All right. Any further questions of staff? Okay. I just want to bring up the fact that we have like 33 minutes before the regular council meeting is, we're going to have two separate discussions. Actually, we have 3 separate discussions to go on, so we need to move on, or we need to start thinking about, back of our minds, what we're going to do and extend, continue the meeting. So, all right, so I guess Jeff then will ask Ryan to disconnect himself. And then I guess we'll send him a message somehow or another for him to reconnect himself?
We'll somehow let him know when we're ready for him to come back. So the first discussion will be on sites 4 and 5 in the staff report, and only sites 4 and 5. Since Councilmember Vienna has a conflict because of property that he owns, he's recusing himself.
Okay, that to be 111 North Cataract. Is staff going to present something on that particular piece of property? Yeah, it's 115 North Cataract. Well, no, that's yours. No.
Yeah, 4 and 5 is what we're
4 and
talking
5,
about.
western portion of Albertson Shopping Center, 114 through 168 East Bonita. John, you have 3 and 4, right?
3 and 6, yeah,
three and
so
six.
I'll
Okay, sorry.
So Site 4 is the western half of the Albertson Shopping Center. We are not looking to touch the Albertsons or the parking lot. Those are both owned by Albertsons. We are looking to redevelop that western part. We see that as being mixed use. It is a very important location for commercial, so we see the commercial coming back in as ground floor commercial, and then apartments or mixed use being placed above and to the rear of the property. Anything to the rear would also block the train noise from actually continuing across Bonita.
Who actually owns that property now?
There's 7 parcels with 5 owners. One of the parcels is city-owned. That corner piece in the upper left-hand corner is city-owned. We have had 2 of the property owners reach out to us, say they are interested. We haven't had any of them expressly state they weren't. But we see this as being a good chance to kind of revitalize that eastern edge of the downtown area.
Okay. Any further questions?
Well, I'm in favor of this particular site. I might, if I had my druthers, configure it a little bit differently and not take so much of that. I might do half of it, bordering the street. The thing to consider about this piece of property is that it's at what is a congested intersection already, and with the gold line, there's going to be a lot of additional things going on there, and having this many trips coming out of those apartments, because I think you're saying that's going to be 77 units, which equates to about close to 400 trips a day on cars coming out of those apartments. That's going to be adding to the congestion on that intersection.
It's a shame to lose any businesses whatsoever. I mean, that's a problem. But I think considering the limits that we have, this is an appropriate site.
But also, I understand that it's still going to be potential commercial as well as residential, so we might not be losing any businesses at all. I understand what John's saying about the trips and everything, but this has been through the planning department, the consultants, our housing element committee, through planning, the planning commission. I agree with them that it's a property that should move on, so it should be included in that list. And I'll hear any other discussion on it, or I'll entertain a motion.
I so move that we include this property.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. With a comment, this is one of those properties that, specifically because of its location, may not need to be at 35 units per acre as is anticipated. That's going to be a tall building, especially since it'll probably have parking, unless they're going underground, which I doubt. And if you're going to put stores in there as well, which I totally think you should, definitely. But we may want to dial back on the density when it gets to, so I'm okay with giving it to the HDD like this, and I voted aye. But this is one of those things where we may want to more closely evaluate what extra units we have, and maybe we can dial back.
I agree. I'm sure that planning department will look at that and keep that in the mind.
A 4-story, 5-story building there just would not be
Okay, so Parcel number 4 passes 4-0. Councilman Vienna, he is, I guess, abstains.
Recused.
All right, so let's move on to number 5. Properties located north of Arrow Highway, generally located between San Dimas Avenue and Walnut Avenue, 105 through 279 East Arrow Highway.
This is in the current housing element, and it should stay just as it is with whatever indications Ken and staff have put on it.
So this site actually has been included in the last 2 housing elements. We're actually at the point where HCD would normally not allow this site to be re-included, but because of the proximity to the Gold Line, we can use that as an extenuating circumstance and include it once again. It is worth noting that the middle of is still designated for Gold Line parking, but we believe that the proximity to the Gold Line makes this a really good opportunity for development in San Dimas.
Okay, any further questions?
This includes the city yard, right?
It does, yeah, right now, correct.
That's the big problem with this piece of property.
Again, when it comes to zoning and actual development, you can work with that, since we've got a lot of extra wiggle room with the affordable and the total units.
Well, it's a good piece of property because it's right next to the Gold Line and
It's supposed to be in the transportation corridor.
transportation corridors.
Yeah. I'll entertain a motion.
Move we include sites 5.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, well, that passes 4-0. Councilman Vienna abstains. Okay, can we get a hold of Ryan? And John, don't go far.
Emmett, someone wants to, I think.
Sir.
Yeah, I'm the property owner on 279 Arrow Highway. And
Sir, could you step up here, please?
I've notified Councilmember Vienna to come back as well, so we'll just wait for him to sign back on.
He's actually back on, but if he's going to talk about the property, does he have to leave again?
Oh.
He's with us now.
We've already voted on them.
We've already voted, so I don't know what this comment is about, but if it's about the sites that we already voted on, we should move on.
Could you keep it brief, sir?
yeah, again, from when I talked to the Gold Line, that they're taking the yard as for their parking. And I was just wondering, we really don't want to sell right now on that. And when you're talking about there's no eminent domain at this time, can there be like a future eminent domain with the county or the state? If they push harder, let's assume that nobody wants to sell. You got nothing. Is that still the framework and that's acceptable? Worst case scenario? What I'm trying to say is, how far can they go with eminent domain with our place? If you guys don't do it, can the county do it? Can the state do it? Can anybody do it? If we don't decide, we don't want to sell.
Chris, you want to answer that?
A governmental agency can initiate condemnation on any property and go through that process, is my understanding. And I think if the question is, can some other governmental entity come in eminent domain to force the affordable housing, I would defer to Jeff in terms of that question.
That's usually not done. There may be some theoretical legal argument that the county or the state could do that, but it's usually not done to construct housing.
Okay.
And it certainly is not anything to do with this housing element process. That would be, it's not relevant to the housing element discussion.
Let's move on to property number 3, which would be a property that John has to recuse himself from. Ryan?
So site number 3 is 115 North Cataract.
Is Ryan on? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
So it's currently a storage yard. It does hold the historic packing house. because of public sentiment towards the packing house, we are looking at using...
Yeah, I apologize, but is it possible to put this in presentation on the Zoom so I can see what you're referring to?
I don't know.
Thank you.
So because of the public sentiment towards the packing house, we are looking at a light mixed use for this property and a little bit of lower density. We see this as kind of being a transition between the proximity to the rail line and the residential neighborhoods.
Okay, any questions of staff? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 4-0 with Councilman Ebner abstaining. We'll move on to property 6. Vacant property located at the southwest corner of Cataract and Bonita Avenue, 344 West Bonita Avenue.
Planning was thinking this would be the one you'd have the most problem with. But this one's already got a development under consideration. This is PSQ. Oh, this is just including whatever units would be included, residential units would be included in PSQ as part of the housing element.
All right.
I would move approval of this property.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes 4-0 with Councilman Ebner abstaining. Could we bring him back in, please?
And just for the record, the abstentions will be actually recusals by
Right.
Councilmember Ebner.
Okay. Jeff, at what point does Councilman Ebner have an opportunity to do his PowerPoint?
Since we're all back together and there's no more conflicts tonight, then he can do his PowerPoint whenever he chooses.
Great.
Okay, then I'll choose for him, if you don't mind, sir.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Do it. I'm good. Do I get the clicker, or do you want me to just? And how do we make that full screen? Is that as full a screen as we're going to get? Okay. And that's the four. Okay. This should take about 5 minutes. So I've got some slides here, and basically I wanted to just use this to help myself with some comments and illustrate. I've got a couple of proposals, and I've got just some other comments about where we're going with with all the sites that have been proposed or recommended. So here's a map of San Dimas outlined. There's a little bit of foothills that are missing, and that's the entire city of San Dimas. And one of the concerns that I and others have had is that the sites that have been recommended are all in one part of town. So these are the housing sites recommended by staff, and I understand the consultant and the planning commission. So those are those sites. I'm going to go a little bit closer into, you can see them a little bit better. So here are the recommended sites. I don't have them numbered, but if there's any one particular one we want to talk about, then we can do that. But what this shows is that really for the entire burden of all the housing production that we're specifying in our table of sites that are going to be rezoned, and I realize there are other sites that are developing mostly moderate or above, but for all the affordable and the preponderance, as we were saying in the table, over 1,600 sites, not counting that one to the right, is if I want to do a little pointer, what button is that? The green one there. Okay, so that's the kind of the backup site right there. If you include that, you're over 1,800 units in that Bonita corridor, or greater downtown, as we've been calling it. Now, I wanted to talk about two problems that you look at that neighborhood and you notice that there's residential up here, single family. There's residential in this area right here. And then there's residential to the east here. And when people are driving from these units, think about where they might want to go. So a lot of them will go to the, right here it is, where you can get on the freeway. A lot of them might go to the east.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow. It would be helpful if you wouldn't mind just maybe stating the streets when you're doing that, as I can't really see the
Yeah, good point, Ryan, thank you. Let's see here. So yeah, so Arrow Highway's down here, Bonita's right here, the railroad track is right here. And these streets, you know, first through 5th and 6th, San Dimas Avenue, and then down here where the Pioneer Park neighborhood is. So those are a lot of residents. And so people are going to be trying to get here and there, maybe up to the 210 freeway. You wonder how they're going to get there. How many cars will be added? Talking about, so the idea is, well, are we adding any significant number of cars? Maybe it's not very many. So the number, I'm using this number 1,000. Now, we talked about the 1,600 number that's actually in that chart. But the number is lower because ADUs can count to up to 350. There's some other units that are in other developments. So just to make the math easy, I'm going to say 1,000 units. So it's not 1,248, but let's say we're putting 1,000 units. Say that's how many are built in the downtown area. The number of parking spaces per unit, it's our requirement, is 2. The Avalon, for example, is 2.2 because you got to count guest parking, and units over 2 bedrooms require an additional parking spot. But it's basically 2 per unit with 1,000 units. They're planning for 2,000 cars. And the question I have, which is a serious question, is where are those 2,000 cars going to be going? The other side of this is another way of looking at it, or another helpful statistics or numbers, are the traffic counts. So this is a big table here. Sherry, thanks to Sherry for giving me the numbers, and she gave me even more than that. But this is 2017 is the last time we did this kind of overall traffic, and we didn't do it on all the smaller streets, but you'll see the first line, the first 2 lines are Arrow Highway. Bonita Cataract is, that's from the intersection way down by the freeway, is a certain number, 18,000, 30,000 for Cataract to San Dimas Avenue, because as you know, a lot of people turn from Covina onto Arrow Highway there. But you can see the other numbers there. Bonita has 14,000, 17,000. These are trips per day. Cataract, south of Bonita, is 2,600. Eucla, south of Bonita, is 3,200. We don't have numbers for north of Bonita. I wish we did, because that's would probably be impacted by some of these developments. So down at the bottom here, the numbers above are the same. The daily trips per unit in a 3-story multifamily development is 5.44. It's 7 or so if it's a 2-story. But let's just say it's a 3-story, which is kind of generally what we're thinking about doing. And so the additional daily trips are 5,000, over 5,000. If we were somehow to build 1,600 units, we'd be talking about 8,000 plus more daily trips than we have right now. And I direct your attention to the top numbers. I know I'm going fast here, but if I can get the pointer, there it is. We're going to be adding somewhere between 5,400, oh, thank you, Kimberly, or whoever's doing that, that's great. We're going to be adding, they're going to be added to some of these numbers. I'm not sure which numbers they'll be added to, but that's a lot of trips. And obviously some of these trips, for example, the Bonita to Cataract, that folds in with the 29,000 here. So they're the same people, a lot of them doing that. So 5,000 new trips added to the downtown area. And this is one reason why putting so many units on Bonita, or with easy access to Bonita as the main way in and out of the downtown area, is, I believe, harmful to the city in general. I mean, we already know what the traffic is like on Bonita and San Dimas Avenue around that area. And people who live on Euclid know what it's like to have people traveling down their street. Anyway, so here's the recommended housing sites again. Very quickly, there were a bunch of other housing sites on a list. They're out there on our website, but I don't think they were considered well enough. Here are some of them. This isn't all of them. This is some of them. There's some that are slightly out, and this map here has the 210 at the top, 57 on the left. It goes down to I think Covina down there at the bottom, and San Dimas Canyon on the right. And so you see where the red is what's being proposed, but there are other ones. Now, just in the interest of focusing on a couple, I would suggest that we add 5 sites. And I would suggest we take away 1 site. Number 1, I would take away the trails. So the trails will probably develop at have some kind of development because they're interested in it, but I don't think they need to be in the housing element. The trails provides 80 units. None of them are low income, is what we're suggesting here in our recommendation from staff and the Planning Commission. None of them are affordable. 80 are moderate, and so the trails, if we put it in there and we encourage people to develop, nothing says they can't do it under the current zoning, but if we encourage them and incentivize them, all that traffic's going to go on Euclid or 5th. Some will go on Amelia, but those 3 streets will just be very heavily impacted. So I take out the trails. The 5 sites I'd like to include, I'll very briefly go over them because they were out there on our website. There's 2 up on Gladstone. Whoops, sorry, go back. And whoops. There's 2 up on Gladstone. They're really 1 site in the presentation, but there's these 2 right here. There's a storage facility here, so the building, the property value should be low. There's a lot of vacancies and a mishmash down here in that triangle. The other 2 sites are here. 3 sites are on Arrow Highway. And I want to draw your attention to the Gold Line station there. It's in yellow. The Gold Line is mentioned 32 times in the housing element. 32 times because the Gold Line is supposed to be a draw and a reason we're putting everything here. If that is the case, and I didn't pace it or measure it, I didn't have time to do that, but if you look at those 3 industrial sites that are down below, and that one on the very right is a warehouse, basically, storage. So then there's a right-of-way, which is a sign manufacturer, and another one. But those 3, look how close they are to the Gold Line station. In fact, those 3 sites are closer to the Gold Line station than all but 2 of the recommended ones, and I'm not counting the overflow one, but the overflow one is, I think it's closer than the overflow one is too on the very right. So very quickly, that's when I suggested this to staff thought, whoops, I'm sorry, thought I was doing the, when I suggested this to staff, they thought I meant the houses here as well. I wasn't considering that. I was considering the storage right by the freeway, right by a lot of shopping. I mean, it doesn't have to be just by the Gold Line, by the way, right by shopping, and then the triangular piece down here. And I don't know, there's 7, there's less than 7 because it doesn't include the houses. This is a small piece of property, but still, this is the right-of-way, and this is at Arrow Highway. That's the street going left to right, and San Dimas Avenue. And you know, there's an Arco station on the corner there, then there's a right-of-way sign company. And this is 1.38 acres, as it says, and this could easily be added. Think about it this way. We've got a buffer of over 400 units or more, 500, 600 units, a buffer that we've built in because we're worried about, or we're not worried, but we don't want to have to revisit the housing element. Based on Ken's questions or answers earlier about if we've got a bigger buffer, so what? If these are right for the development, then they should be included. They enter and exit onto Arrow Highway, which is a major street, and as much as we want everybody to use the Gold Line and not have cars and all that, they are going to have the 1 and 2 cars per family, and they're going to generate the 5.44 trips per day out of each one of those units, at least in the foreseeable future. This is on this Walnut, which is the north-south street there, again, Arrow Highway. Then right across the street is the last one, and that's like a huge piece of property, and yet it's within easy walking distance of the station on Arrow Highway again. And so those 5 sites that I just mentioned, I would ask my fellow council members to really consider them. And if you want to think about it until the next meeting, we have to submit this by October 15th, I believe the day is. So we do have time. We have one more meeting to add these, and so we could adopt or give our decision on all the other sites. And there they are again, and that's it.
You would exclude some of the 15 then that we have?
Well,
and add new ones?
I would exclude more than just the trails, because I think or I would reduce the density, at least. I don't have a gripe about almost any of those sites, except the 35 units per acre, massive 4-story apartments on each side of Bonita Avenue, and who knows where the Station Shopping Center is right now. There's just too much for that one area. It's going to be it will bring a lot of people, but we don't want to lose that small town feeling that we have. I mean, we don't want to be Glendale. Does anybody want to be Glendale?
I think I appreciate your presentation, John. I think there's some specious reasoning that got us through it. And just to point out, like you said, this legislation is a one-size-fits-all piece of legislation. I don't think it fits the city of San Dimas. I wish we could just skip it all together. If the grant funding we would lose would be something that we could, do a Measure SD again for and pay for and just not have to worry about this and everybody can go on their merry way, I would love to do it, but we just can't. But I noticed, like, in your presentation, it was things like how many cars will be added, how much traffic will be added, where will all these cars go? The reality is that all of these sites are not going to be built. And we know that. It's not, I get planning for the worst and hoping for the best, but we know from previous arena cycles, this number of units straight up will not be built. It's unrealistic. And I think even the most supportive legislators in Sacramento that like the RENA process, as much as we dislike it, they like it. They've even acknowledged that the numbers that have come out this year are completely unreasonable and unattainable. So I understand where you're coming from with the plan for the worst, hope for the best, but I just think it's not realistic that these are going to be built to the density that we're talking about.
And Eric, that's exactly what my point is that we would then have more freedom to zone them a little bit less in the various places, or choose which one are the highest density. And if we had some additional sites, so we have that bigger buffer, and I just want to emphasize, Arrow Highway is the place to put a lot. We need some more units in downtown area. I totally agree, and I've supported it. I was the first one in the council to support higher density where it belongs. So I'm totally in favor of that. I understand why we need it, and I do want that to have the synergy in downtown. But why put it all
let's
there?
Let Ryan have something to say here.
And if I could also
raised his hand, and I didn't know it for quite a while.
If I could also just mention, fun fact about me, for a short time between residences that we owned in San Dimas, I lived at the Trails, and that place is not a good place. The landlords there change hands regularly. I felt as if it was a very predatory type of property management. I had to leave the apartment that we were in early because of it was full of black mold. So when we're talking about the trails, I don't know, my initial thought would be that that place needs a serious facelift and it needs some love. So perhaps a change in density or something, but I don't know that I would be all for taking the trails off the list completely.
All right, Ryan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, I know we're pressed on time, so I'll be brief. First and foremost, thank you to the staff. I think staff, the Housing Subcommittee, the Planning Commission, everyone spent a lot of time on this, and the city spent a lot of money on this. When I look at the map, John, that you presented, and I had looked over some of this as it was presented, I hear what you're saying. And in the 7th housing element update, I think we can do some of what you're talking about, assuming that a number of these things materialize. But I suspect, like Councilman Weber pointed out, that the reality is, much like some of the school district property, some of it may sit in its current condition for some period of time. And even when I looked at the map that you presented this evening, this kind of goes back to some of the comments I had shared about vision for the city. What do we want? What do we plan? And members of the community, at least when I go out and walk and talk to people, they don't want to eat in Laverne anymore. They don't want to eat in Glendora or Covina. And as you all know, especially with your tenure, that this comes down to population density. It comes down to what we can do to be able to bolster that area to attract those developments that people want, so that it improves their quality of life. I lived in downtown LA for 1 year. I lived right above the gold line, the actual purple line connector in the financial district at 7th and Flower. People who live near mass transit, just like I have property here, will use that mass transit to go to Pasadena for dinner, to be able to go to school, whatever the case is, that will reduce some of those trips. I've seen it. So I said I was going to be brief, so I will end with this. I will move that we adopt staff's recommendation in the Planning Commission, that the City Council approve the 15 proposed sites for inclusion in the San Dimas 6th cycle house element.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Eric, what did you say about the trails at the very end of your comments?
It just, my impression, I would not be supportive of removing it from the list.
I just wanted to understand.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
No comments now. I know the way it's going to go. I kind of knew this from the beginning. I'll make more comments during my council member comments at the end of the regular meeting, and that's it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
Motion passes 3-2. Councilman Bertone and Councilman Ebner voted against that project.
No, I don't think the trails is a bad addition, so I disagree with you there, John. I think the pieces of property just south of Arrow Highway, though, should be looked at, because I think that's appropriate. Those are the properties I would look at. I think the 15 that we just approved are not bad, and we have no control over our population, and I think that's a shame that the state is taking this away from us. So it doesn't matter where we put it, we're going to be over-trafficked, and I think the small town view of San Dimas, like all other cities, is going to be fastly disappearing, I'm afraid.
Well, actually, I'll then make a motion to reconsider if we want to go ahead and just simply not approve the housing element and snub it to the state. If anyone wants to do that, then I'm happy to make a motion to reconsider.
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it passes 3-2. Just a quick question. Can we add additional space? Say we thought about it more down the line. We've already passed this thing, but if we thought about it more and we talked about the 3 properties at John, even though, so we voted on these 15, could we add the 3 more at a later date?
we would have to go back to HCD, but my question to you would be, why would we need to? There's nothing stopping us from still developing those and counting them towards our RENA numbers. There'd be no reason to have to reopen the housing element to add sites when we could just rezone those as council see fits to promote development within the city. And then once those development numbers are met, I mean, once we meet our RENA numbers, as far as developed, we can take sites off after those numbers are met. But there's nothing stopping council from developing additional sites that would still count towards our RENA numbers.
All right.
But if I'm a developer, doesn't it make sense if I look at San Dimas and I've got more sites that are open to me to develop? I mean, and if I'm a property owner, doesn't it make sense if I've got the overlay, so I'm not doing anything to the underlying zone, doesn't it make sense that you just have the more choices? And it would just take pressure off of us when we go through the zoning itself, which we have to do in 3 years. It'd be the downtown specific plan and maybe some other things. But it would take pressure off us so we could say, yeah, instead of the 1,600, which is way over the 1,248, right? Why not make it 2,000? And then we can just downzone some things where we need to. I'm just saying for future, this passed tonight, and that's fine. But to answer your question, what I would like to do is put these other, let's just say these 3 sites in the plan, send it up to HCD, and see what they say. We still have the public hearing, so this isn't final, right? It has to come to us, and we have another public hearing, December or January, to do the final. Wouldn't it make sense to put these 3 additional sites, only 3, in the, hey, HCD, take a look at it, and then we can decide, oh, we don't need them. But if we don't put them in before the 15th, then as Ken says, it's a big hassle because their HCD has to look at it some other time.
I don't agree with the 2 properties on Arrow. I think from a planning perspective, it's not consistent with the use around it. You look at the Avalon development over in Glendora and a couple of the others that are west of where the hospital is off of Route 66. And they're just random. It just is a random high-density development. And that's exactly what those Arrow proposals would be. And as far as the proposals up off of Gladstone, I think the issue with that is, as you currently see, it's going to be challenging with what's going on with that area specifically that's already impacted negatively with the Costco and everything else that's going on. So I just don't know that use in densification really makes sense for quality of life of people that may get there. So for those reasons, I'm not supportive of including it. I'm not opposed to discussing it further, but I think time is of the essence, and we've exercised and spent a lot of people's time and money to get where we're at tonight on this vote.
Okay, Chris?
I would just leave it with a last note and take a step back. We've been fighting SB 9 because we want local control over our development. If we designate properties way above what's legally required, what the state forcing us to do, then the triggers of density bonuses and other items that we would be required to consider would be triggered. And the only benefit we would be providing to a developer would be, I don't have to pay to do a general plan amendment and rezone to accomplish the affordable housing, which the council can consider, like it did 299 Foothill, to take light ag to residential. And so if somebody wants to develop any of the properties that we haven't designated through our housing element to affordable housing, we can still telegraph that we're open to it if you want to propose it, and allow a developer who's ready and willing and able to develop whatever density that we think is reasonable to apply. And at that time, we consider and swap properties or add it in addition at that point, but not lock us into the housing element at the state, since once we lock ourselves into it, voila, now you have all the requirements, restrictions of affordable housing at the state. You are now mandated to adhere to those.
All right.
And as we close the meeting, Mr. Mayor, I've been asked to relay that we need a couple of minutes for the transition, the video transition for the regular meeting, so we'll need a little break in between.
All right. All right, so the motion passes 3-2. Any further discussion? We have a council meeting that was supposed to start 5 minutes ago, so.
Did you, I just don't want to miss the technicality here. Did you have to take a roll call vote because Ryan's remote? I don't think we took a roll call vote.
Oh, that's a very good point. So we should go ahead and take a roll call vote.
I don't want your decision to be thrown out because there's a technicality. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut.
Councilmember Bertone,
No.
Councilmember Ebner,
No.
Councilmember Vienna,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Weber,
Yes.
Mayor Bedar.
Yes.
That motion carries 3-2 with Councilmember Ebner and Bertone opposing.
All right.
Now, should we also go back and do properties 3 and 6 as well, since the same issue would pop up for that?
We would do properties 3 and 6, that's right, because Councilmember Vienna was participating in that discussion, so you can go ahead and do that. I don't think Councilmember Eber needs to leave the room.
All right, roll call for 3 and 6.
Councilmember Bertone,
Yes.
Councilmember Ebner, Councilmember Vienna,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Weber,
Yes.
Mayor Bedar.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0 with Councilmember Ebner's recusal.
Okay,
Site number 4, was it?
4 and 5.
3 and 6.
3 and 6. Councilmember Bertone,
Yes.
No, we already voted on how we need to vote.
Now
don't
we
need
do
to
4 and 5?
okay.
We don't need to do 4 and 5 because all the members were here for that one.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Apologize to the general public, the study session, special meeting rather, was a little extended. So I'll give us about 5 minutes for technical transition.